The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galactic sector for 3 millennia with a sort of casual arrogance that comes from having excellent military technology and an even better public relations department. Their latest governmental initiative, the Apex Predator Rehabilitation Program, was supposedly designed to transform the galaxy's most dangerous species into productive members of civilized society. In reality, it was an elaborate method of demonstrating Zephyrian superiority while conveniently eliminating potential threats through what their bureaucrats cheerfully termed natural selection processes. The program worked like this. Take your average death world predator species, drop representatives of weaker civilizations into their habitat, and observe the inevitable carnage. If the weakest species survived, which they never did, they earned galactic citizenship. If they didn't, well, that was simply nature taking its course. The Zephyrians had tested this system on 47 different species over the past century, with a success rate that would make a statistics professor weep, 0.0%. The Vorthak had lasted 6 hours. The crystalline Zeltnari managed an impressive 2 days before being reduced to very expensive gravel. Even the militant Drachmori, who prided themselves on their warrior culture, barely made it past sunrise on their assigned death world. Each failure was meticulously documented, analyzed, and filed away as further proof that only the Zephyrians possessed the necessary qualities for true galactic leadership. Then humanity discovered faster-than-light travel, and everything went sideways in the most spectacular way possible. Earth had been on the galactic radar for approximately 15 minutes when the first diplomatic contact was established. The Zephyrian assessment team returned with reports that defied all conventional wisdom about species classification. Humans, according to their extensive biological surveys, were soft, slow, and possessed of an alarming tendency to form emotional attachments to literally anything that moved. They had somehow managed to dominate their planet not through superior physical prowess or advanced natural weaponry, but through something the analysts struggled to quantify: cooperation. Administrative Vextherin, whose purple carapace gleamed with the sort of polish that came from never having done an honest day's work, reviewed the reports with growing amusement. Humans kept other species as pets. They formed family units with non-genetic members. Most bizarrely, their offspring required nearly 2 decades of constant care before reaching maturity. By Zephyrian standards, they were evolutionary failures wrapped in delusions of adequacy. Perfect test subjects, Vextherin announced to his staff during the morning briefing. If we can demonstrate that even human children cannot survive the Predator program, we'll have definitive proof that only the Zephyrian genetic template produces viable galactic citizens. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than using adult humans, who might possess rudimentary survival skills, they would select human children, specifically, the youngest specimens who had demonstrated basic communication abilities. These would be transported to Keth-Va Prime, home to the Keth-Vari, pack-hunting predators whose 6-meter frames and regenerative capabilities had earned them the designation Apex Death World Species, Class Omega. The Keth-Vari had never encountered prey that didn't immediately flee or fight. They were perfectly designed killing machines, razor-sharp claws, acidic saliva, pack coordination that bordered on telepathic, and an unfortunate tendency to play with their food. Previous test subjects had the courtesy to die quickly. The Zephyrians expected human children to provide a few hours of mildly educational entertainment before becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of evolutionary complacency. 6 human children were selected from different geographical regions of Earth, chosen specifically for their apparent helplessness. The selection committee, comprised entirely of Zephyrian xenobiologists who had never actually interacted with a human, based their choices on extensive video surveillance and what they assumed was scientific principles. Mika Chen, age 8, was selected from a playground in Neo, Singapore, because she appeared to spend most of her time organizing other children into incomprehensible games. Tommy Rodriguez, age 6, was chosen from a mathematics learning center in Mexico City due to his apparent obsession with arranging objects into patterns. Zara Okafor, age 10, caught their attention at a community center in Lagos where she seemed to be mediating disputes between older children with alarming effectiveness. The other 3 selections followed similar logic. Children who displayed behaviors that the Zephyrians interpreted as weaknesses, but which any human observer would recognize as natural leadership abilities, problem-solving skills, and social intelligence. The transport to HFY Prime took 3 standard weeks, during which the children were kept in comfortable containment pods with access to basic educational materials and nutritional supplements. The HFY staff maintained clinical observation protocols, noting with academic interest how the children seemed to adapt to their situation with remarkable resilience. Several xenobiologists published preliminary papers on preterminal behavioral adaptation in juvenile Homo sapiens. Dr. Kilneth, the expedition's chief behavioral analyst, found the children's reactions particularly fascinating. Instead of the expected fear responses, they seemed to be treating their imprisonment as an extended field trip. Tommy had somehow figured out the mathematical principles behind the ship's artificial gravity and was conducting experiments with his food portions. Zara had established a rudimentary communication system with the other children using hand signals visible through the pod windows. Mika appeared to be studying the HFY staff rotation schedules and had correctly predicted 3 shift changes. Remarkable cognitive flexibility for a pre-terminal species, Dr. Kilneth noted in his daily log. The subjects appear to be treating imminent death as a learning opportunity. HFY Prime rotated around a harsh binary star system that bathed the planet in perpetual twilight. The landscape consisted primarily of crystalline rock formations, acidic pools, and vegetation that had evolved specifically to be as unwelcoming as possible. The atmosphere was technically breathable for humans, though the Zephyrians had thoughtfully provided breathing apparatus to ensure the children survived long enough to provide useful data. The HFY themselves were magnificent specimens of evolutionary efficiency. Standing 6 meters tall on their hind legs, with muscular builds that suggested they could casually tear through starship hulls, they possessed the kind of natural weaponry that appeared in the nightmares of military engineers. Their pack intelligence operated on principles that the galaxy's foremost xenopsychologists had spent decades trying to understand, involving complex territorial behaviors, elaborate hunting rituals, and a social hierarchy based on combat prowess and resource acquisition. Each child was transported to a different territorial zone, equipped with basic survival gear, and released with the sort of ceremony typically reserved for academic experiments. The monitoring stations established around each drop zone contained enough surveillance equipment to track every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of the anticipated tragedy. Dr. Kilneth settled into the primary observation center with his staff, preparation complete for what promised to be the most comprehensive study of predator-prey dynamics ever conducted. The betting pools among the research staff favored a survival time of approximately 4 hours, with optimistic outliers suggesting some subjects might last until the planet's next dawn cycle. What happened next would later be required reading in xenobiology courses across 7-star systems. Mika-Chen landed approximately 2 kilometers from a HFY pack's primary den site. The pack, led by a particularly scarred specimen the research team had designated Krexai, detected her presence within minutes. Standard HFY hunting protocol involved surrounding prey, cutting off escape routes, and then engaging in a coordinated attack that typically lasted no more than 30 seconds. Instead, Krexai and his pack found themselves observing a small bipedal creature who appeared to be arranging rocks into patterns while making rhythmic vocal sounds. The surveillance equipment captured everything. Mika had discovered a cache of colorful mineral deposits and was creating what any human would immediately recognize as a hopscotch court, complete with improvised markers and boundary lines. As the HFY pack approached, she looked up with the sort of bright smile typically reserved for meeting new playmates. "Hi there," she announced in perfectly cheerful English, which the translation systems immediately rendered into HFY hunting pack communication frequencies. "Do you want to play a game?" The pack froze. In 3 million years of evolutionary development, no prey species had ever initiated social contact with the HFY. Their behavioral programming simply had no response protocol for this situation. Krexai, whose hunting instincts had been honed by countless successful kills, found himself in the unprecedented position of being confused. The small creature showed no fear responses. It wasn't fleeing or fighting or displaying any of the behaviors that typically triggered HFY attack reflexes. Instead, it seemed to be inviting some form of interaction. Mika, interpreting the pack's stillness as interest, began demonstrating her game. She hopped from one rock pattern to another, explaining the rules with the sort of enthusiasm that 8-year-olds reserve for their favorite activities. The translation system struggled with concepts like turns, fairness, and having fun, producing approximations that emphasize cooperation and structured interaction. Within an hour, 6 apex predators were tentatively attempting to navigate a hopscotch course designed by a human child. The scene in the observation center defied all precedent. Dr. Kilneth watched his instruments register Kethvari stress levels dropping to unprecedented lows. The pack's aggressive pheromone production had ceased entirely. Most impossibly, their vocalizations were beginning to mimic human speech patterns. Similar scenarios were unfolding across all 6 drop zones. Tommy Rodriguez had encountered a smaller pack and was teaching them basic mathematics using hunting formation principles. The Kethvari, whose pack coordination had always been instinctual, found themselves learning to count, to calculate distances, and to optimize their territorial resource distribution using concepts that Tommy explained with the patience of a natural teacher. Zara Okafor had landed in a disputed territory where 2 packs were engaged in a territorial conflict. Instead of being caught in the crossfire, she had somehow managed to establish herself as a neutral mediator. The surveillance equipment recorded her sitting cross-legged between 2 groups of massive predators, calmly explaining concepts like sharing, taking turns, and finding solutions that work for everyone. The other 3 children were achieving similar impossibilities. Jake Thompson from Australia had introduced the concept of cooperative hunting to a pack that had always operated on individual competition principles. Liu Wei from Beijing was teaching basic tool use and construction techniques. Emma Johansson from Stockholm had somehow convinced her assigned pack to attempt agriculture. Dr. Kilneth's preliminary reports to Administrator Vex Theron grew increasingly frantic as the first week progressed. The children were not only surviving but thriving. More importantly, they were fundamentally altering Kethvari society in ways that the xenobiological community had deemed impossible. The subjects appeared to be engaging in cultural transmission, he reported during the weekly briefing. The Kethvari are adopting human behavioral patterns and social structures. Administrator Vex Theron's response involved several choice Zephyrian curses that had never been translated into standard Galactic. The Apex Predator Rehabilitation Program was designed to eliminate weak species, not create new civilizations. By the end of the first month, the changes on Kethvar Prime had become impossible to ignore. The planet's predator population was exhibiting behaviors that challenged every assumption about their species. Packs were sharing territory. Hunting activities had been supplemented by gathering and early agricultural attempts. Most disturbing of all, the Kethvari were beginning to develop art. Mika's pack had started creating elaborate ground paintings using the same colorful minerals she had initially arranged for hopscotch. Tommy's group was constructing geometric structures that served no practical purpose beyond what humans would recognize as aesthetic pleasure. Zara's mediated territories had established the planet's first inter-pack trade agreements. The children had not just survived their first month on a death world, they had accidentally created the foundation of Kethvari civilization. 3 months into the experiment, Dr. Kilneth submitted a report that fundamentally challenged the Zephyrian understanding of species development. The Kethvari were no longer recognizable as the same species that had been classified as apex predators. They had developed primitive but effective governance systems, established permanent settlements, and were actively protecting their human pack leaders from any potential threats. The protective instincts were particularly noteworthy. When a Zephyrian extraction team attempted to retrieve Mika for additional study, Krex High's pack responded with coordinated defensive behaviors that demonstrated both their original predator capabilities and their new cooperative principles. The extraction team withdrew after encountering what their mission report described as organized passive resistance backed by credible threat of overwhelming force. Similar attempts to extract the other children met with identical results. The Kethvari had evolved beyond simple predator-prey relationships into something approaching a guardian species. They had become, in the words of one frustrated Zephyrian military commander, aggressively protective of their small leaders. 6 months after the initial drop, Kethvar Prime had become the subject of intense galactic attention. The planet that had once served as the Zephyrian Empire's ultimate testing ground was now home to a rapidly developing civilization that combined human social innovations with Kethvari physical capabilities and resource management instincts. The children had not merely survived, They had created something unprecedented in galactic history. A hybrid culture that preserved the best aspects of both species while eliminating the limitations that had previously defined each group. Mika had become something resembling a benevolent dictator to her pack, establishing rules based on fairness and cooperation while maintaining the Kethvari respect for strength and competence. Tummy's mathematical innovations had revolutionized resource distribution across multiple territories. Zara's diplomatic protocols had ended centuries of interpack warfare and established the planet's first continent-wide peace agreements. The Galactic Council, faced with reports that contradicted 3 millennia of established xenobiological theory, dispatched a comprehensive scientific expedition to investigate the Kethva Prime situation. Their findings would eventually result in a complete restructuring of galactic political relationships. The expedition's lead investigator, Dr. Yimshera of the Crystalline Collective, had spent her career studying species development and cultural evolution. Her initial assessment of the Kethva Prime situation was that the reports had been exaggerated or misinterpreted. No species had ever undergone such rapid cultural transformation, and certainly not under the influence of immature representatives of another species. Her first meeting with Mika and Krex High's pack challenged every assumption she had held about interspecies relationships. The 8-year-old human child was conducting what could only be described as a planning meeting with 6-meter-tall predators, discussing resource allocation for the upcoming growing season with the sort of practical competence typically associated with experienced administrators. The Northern Territories have better soil mineral content, Mika explained to her pack, using a combination of simplified English and basic Kethvari hunting signals. But the southern areas get more consistent sunlight. So we should probably split our planting between both regions. Krex High responded with a series of vocalizations that the translation system rendered as agreement, along with additional observations about seasonal weather patterns and predator migration routes that should be considered in their agricultural planning. Dr. Yimshara found herself observing a strategic planning session that demonstrated more sophisticated resource management than she had seen in many supposedly advanced civilizations. The pattern was consistent across all 6 territories. Human children and Kethvari packs had developed hybrid cultural systems that maximized the advantages of both species. The children provided social innovation, conflict resolution, and long-term planning capabilities. The Kethvari contributed physical capabilities, environmental knowledge, and resource management instincts. Most remarkably, both groups seemed to be thriving in ways that neither species had achieved independently. 1 year after the initial experiment, the Galactic Council formally recognized Kethva Prime as an independent system with full diplomatic status. The planet that had once served as a testing ground for species elimination had become the galaxy's youngest and most rapidly developing civilization. The irony was not lost on political observers throughout the sector. The Zephyrian Empire, which had spent millennia demonstrating their superiority over other species, had inadvertently proven that human children possessed greater civilizing capabilities than their entire governmental structure. Earth's diplomatic status was elevated from recently contacted species under evaluation to strategic partner with special advisory capabilities. The Galactic Council specifically requested human cultural consultants for several ongoing interspecies integration projects. Administrative Extheron was reassigned to a monitoring station in the galaxy's outer rim, where his duties involved cataloging asteroid mineral content and filing reports that no one read. His replacement issued a formal apology to Earth's new diplomatic corps and quietly discontinued the Apex Predator Rehabilitation Program. The children of Kethva Prime became the subjects of extensive academic study, though they seemed largely unaware of their galactic significance. They were busy with more important matters, teaching their Kethvari packs about birthday parties, establishing the planet's first educational system, and planning the construction of what would eventually become the sector's most successful interspecies research facility. Dr. Kilnetha's final report on the Kethva Prime experiment was eventually published as the foundation text for the new field of applied interspecies cultural development. His concluding observations became required reading in diplomatic academies across 12 star systems. The human specimens demonstrated that survival is not merely about individual strength or superior technology, but about the ability to create cooperative relationships that enhance the capabilities of all participants. What the Zephyrian Empire failed to understand is that true apex behavior involves lifting others up rather than dominating them. The subjects designated as human children possessed what can only be described as weaponized empathy, the ability to identify potential cooperation opportunities in any situation, and the social skills necessary to implement them. They transformed apex predators not through force or manipulation, but through the simple expedient of treating them as potential friends. It should be noted that this outcome was entirely predictable for any observer familiar with human-child development patterns. The failure to anticipate these results reflects fundamental limitations in Zephyrian analytical methodology rather than any exceptional capabilities on the part of the human subjects. The subjects appeared to consider their situation a particularly interesting adventure rather than a survival challenge. Their adaptation strategies were based on social integration rather than competition, cooperation rather than domination, and mutual benefit rather than zero-sum thinking. In conclusion, the Apex Predator Rehabilitation Program succeeded beyond all expectations, though not in the manner intended by its designers. Instead of eliminating a weak species, it demonstrated that human social development patterns may represent the most effective civilization-building toolkit yet identified in the galactic community. 5 years later, Kethvar Prime had become a major hub for interspecies cooperation research. The planet exported agricultural innovations, conflict resolution methodologies, and educational frameworks to civilizations throughout the sector. The original 6 human children, now teenagers, served as cultural ambassadors and held honorary positions in the Galactic Council's Department of Species Integration. Mika Chen, at 13, had become the youngest individual ever to address the full Galactic Assembly. Her speech on why everyone should try hopscotch was translated into 47 languages and became the foundational document for the Universal Principles of Fair Play Agreement. Tommy Rodriguez had established the galaxy's first interspecies mathematics academy, where young beings from dozens of different worlds learned to solve problems using teaching methods that emphasize cooperation and shared understanding rather than competition. Zara Okafor had founded the Galactic Mediation Corps, an organization dedicated to resolving interspecies conflicts through dialogue and creative problem-solving rather than military intervention. The Kethvari, once considered among the galaxy's most dangerous predators, had become known as the sector's most reliable peacekeeping force and the most effective teachers of cooperation principles. Their unique combination of physical capability and learned social skills made them ideal candidates for diplomatic protection and conflict prevention roles. The greatest irony of the entire situation was that the Zephyrian Empire had achieved their original goal through methods they had never considered. They had indeed created a demonstration of species superiority that established clear galactic hierarchies. They simply hadn't realized that they would end up at the bottom of those hierarchies. Earth had become the galactic community's go-to source for social innovation and cultural development expertise. Human cooperation specialists were in constant demand throughout the sector. The planet that had been dismissed as evolutionarily irrelevant was now considered essential for galactic stability and progress. The children who had been selected for their apparent weakness had revealed the fundamental strength that had allowed humans to dominate their own planet. The ability to turn any situation into an opportunity for building relationships and creating mutual benefit. In the end, the Zephyrians had learned a valuable lesson about the nature of apex behavior, though it was not the lesson they had intended to teach. True dominance came not from the ability to destroy others, but from the capacity to help them become better versions of themselves. And somewhere in the diplomatic archives of the Galactic Council, filed under successful species integration programs, was a report titled How Human Children Accidentally Conquered the Galaxy by Being Really, Really Nice. The universe, it turned out, had quite the sense of humor.